Welcome to Jammin' with Jason Mefford, a show where we discuss topics relevant to Chief Audit Executives and professionals in audit, risk, and compliance. We discuss the technical and soft skills needed to navigate the minefields of organizations. You hear best practices and practical advice for helping you advance your career, and we'll even talk about music, mindfulness, and psychology, because we can. So sit back and relax while you listen to the #1 podcast in the world for internal auditors, unscripted and unedited. Well, welcome, my friends, to another episode of Jamming with Jason. Hey, today I've got a really special friend and guest on, Bruce Turner. And, Bruce and I worked together on the Sawyer's Internal Auditing version 7 that just came out recently, and wanted to make sure and have him on the show because Bruce has an amazing career in a couple of different books that he's written and other stuff like that we want to kind of jump into that is really important information if you're in the internal auditing space. That you should get a hold of. So Bruce, welcome on, man.
Thank you, Jason. It's good to be able to talk to you.
Well, and I guess, in the US, I usually say man, but I need to remember I should be saying mate too, right? So
absolutely.
Yeah. So Bruce, maybe, I know who you are, but maybe just kind of for the listeners, give them a little background, kind of about your career, because I know, you've had a long career in internal audit. You've done a lot of things. And so because of that, you bring a lot of different perspective that most people out there don't actually have.
That's right, Jason. I started in internal auditing way back in the late 70s. And when I was at the International Conference in Anaheim last month, I mentioned in one of my presentations there that I'd spent 21 million minutes in internal auditing. And
that's a lot.
It is. And I was really fortunate to start in internal auditing in a commercial bank and enjoyed the time doing that. I commenced my career in banking and therefore had a pretty good pedigree by the time I moved into the internal auditing area. I ended up spending probably 18 years in the banking arena across commercial banking, merchant banking and central banking. And ultimately, I specialised in auditing the treasury operations and commercial lending operations of those banks, which centred in Australia. And I moved across to London and New York and did the work over there for a while. I then shifted a little bit and left banking and moved to head up the internal audit function at State Rail, which was the organisation that ran passenger services in my state. I spent a few years there and then moved into head of audit and risk management role at Integral Energy, which supplied power to our community. And I finished my career at the Australian Taxation Office, which is one of the biggest public sector organisations in Australia. So I was the Chief Audit Executive there and had a wonderful 5 years before I ended up retiring.
Well, and now there's, because I know sometimes, people might ask, is there life after, retirement? Well, I think you've been staying pretty busy too in retirement and, serving on boards and doing some other stuff as well, even after. And like I said, you've continued to give back to the profession. We'll get into talking about some of the books and other stuff that you've been doing. But yeah, I mean, so like I said, amazing career, kind of starting off outside of audit, coming into audit, moving up, being a chief audit executive at several different organizations, being an author, being a board member. I mean, it's like you really do have a broad, spectrum of experience that now, again, you're sharing with people, across the world. So it was fun to be able to run into you and see you in Anaheim. And I know those are always, I don't know if you were this way too, but there's some people I hadn't seen in 10 or 15 years, that all of a sudden we're together and it's like, oh, wow, time goes. So, so I wanted to talk about, cause I know you just had, a book that came out just recently through the IIA Foundation. It's in the bookstore, and I think you can get it on Amazon too, called New Auditor's Guide to Internal Auditing. So maybe if we can talk just a little bit about that, because I think this is a great resource for people, especially new to the profession, whichever way they end up coming in. And so maybe if you can kind of explain a little bit about, what's in that book, what people can kind of expect, and how it can help them in their career.
I guess we identified a niche in the marketplace for the New Auditor's Guide because people traditionally came into internal auditing from more junior positions. Typically they left university, they completed their studies, and they found a job in internal auditing. And some of them actually stumbled into the profession, and whilst they might have stumbled in, they did stay because it's a fantastic profession and wonderful career. Mm-hmm. But in recent years, you're finding that there's more and more people who are coming into internal audit at more senior positions. And a bunch of these folk are coming from other professions. I cite a couple of examples in the book where people have come from a nursing background, as an example, and move into internal auditing and then need to learn about internal auditing and the challenges that go with that. And one of the things is that people at that more senior level are mature, they're experienced, and they've established, a credibility in their chosen field. But when they come into the internal auditing profession, they're starting at the ground level and they've got so much to learn. And that creates a lot of self-doubt for them as well, because they've moved from being the expert in their field. And the clients, because of their maturity, have great expectations of them. So the idea is that the book sort of goes through all of those elements that people should be familiar with coming into internal auditing. The who of internal auditing, a bit about the profession and the capabilities and the roles. It talks about the why of internal auditing and touches on the governance, risk management, control. It talks about the International Professional Practices Framework. It then moves into the how of auditing, about the planning through to conducting interviews, risk assessments and development of audit programs. And then it touches on the when of internal auditing, getting into the meat of it, the field work and writing up audit reports and participating effectively in quality assessment reviews. And then the follow-up of audit recommendations. So it gives a really good understanding to people about the profession. And it shares a lot of stories from the front line, where I've asked 50 practitioners from across the world for some of their insights and some of their best stories about internal auditing. And that's included in a special chapter within the book.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, and I think that's great. And like you said, I think, if we rewind back, and I didn't start the profession quite when you did, right? But I know even when I did back in the 90s, kind of the common career path was, somebody kind of like me, we go into public accounting, we work for a public accounting firm for, 2 to 10 years, and then you end up kind of transitioning into internal audit. And so people that come through that career path, they're already kind of familiar with audit. They're kind of familiar with things like the work papers and having to follow standards. It's just a matter of, switching from maybe a CPA standard to the CIA standards. But like you said, especially the last, 10, 15 years, we're bringing a lot more people in with more experience, technical experience, because we need that in the departments. And so they kind of missed a lot of that. And, I can only imagine, because we, as auditors, we have our own language and we don't even realize it, right? And I'm sure,
absolutely.
I'm sure you got that in some of the feedback with those case studies that you did of words or terms or, different things that we might even use. And they're like, what does that mean?
And it's not just the words, it's the use of acronyms. There seems to be acronyms for everything. And so we need to understand that for internal auditing, but across the business areas that we visit, there's a whole heap more acronyms there as well.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and like you said, I think nursing is a great example of it, right? Where we're seeing more and more, I guess, non-traditional is not necessarily the right word. It's just the experience that's been there, but of bringing people that are are more experienced, more technical kind of in the areas of our organization, and bring those skill sets, that operational side, into the internal audit profession. So I think like the example of nurses is great, right? And some people might say, why would you hire a nurse? Well, if you're a hospital, having a nurse on the internal audit team who understands all the medical terms, can read the charts, because I remember as a new auditor trying to read medical charts when I was auditing hospitals, and it's like, I don't understand any of this stuff, right? So,
well, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, so these people
and that
really
extends
bring it
into
across. Yeah.
Yeah, it extends into other professions as well. Lawyers coming across to an organisation that has a lot of contracts is really useful. I've used teachers who've come from adult education background, and they're really good people to get out there and start educating people about the risks of fraud and corruption.
Mm-hmm.
I've had former police officers and detectives coming in and working in my investigations team. I've had business process engineers who've come in where there's been a particular improvement focus within the organisation. And as we start delving into the types of people who are coming in, we can actually see the potential of having a multidisciplinary audit team.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that is the future. That's where we're going, because again, the more technical our organizations get, and we probably should have been doing it all along. We just, I think, kind of woke up, a decade or so ago, and have started to try to bring more people in, because we need that skill set, and
Absolutely,
we need to really understand the business better. There's that whole term, you need to understand the business, but it's different to just interview somebody and kind of understand what they're doing versus actually, having been a lawyer for 5 years, or a nurse, or a police officer. You bring in a completely different set of experiences, and it makes our teams much, much better. So
it does indeed.
Yeah. So, I know that's, like you said, that's a great niche book. So for anybody who's maybe new into internal auditing, this is a great resource for you, right? To be able to kind of understand and get a leg up on some of the stuff that's going on out there. So whether you're the new auditor, or even if you're the supervisor, manager, CAE who's bringing people in from other parts of the organization, this is a great resource to help them out, and to help you even kind of understand and empathize with what some of these people may be going through as well. Now, I know you're working on a new book too, and I think the working title is something about the team leaders book, right? You want to tell us a little bit about that and what we can expect with that?
Yeah, it is. So the working title at the moment is Team Leaders Guide to Internal Audit Leadership. And the idea there is that, team leaders are doing a lot more of the heavy lifting these days than they used to, simply because the role of internal auditing is expanding, and more chief audit executives across the world are moving into the C-suite. So they're working very closely with the executive within the organisation. As a consequence, there's a lot of things that chief audit executives used to do which get passed down the line. And we've got a great resource for chief audit executives and people in the C-suite with Sawyer's Internal Auditing 7th edition, as you mentioned a little earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But below that, there's a gap in terms of what team leaders are given to inform them about their changing role. So the idea of this Team Leaders Guide is to actually help them transition into what is a different playing field to what they would have been used to playing on.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so what are some of those things now that, like you said, because in a lot of organizations, the CAE is really kind of being brought up to the C-suite level. And so they're really are acting more like an executive in the organization. What are some of those common things now that are kind of being put down onto the team leaders that they didn't used to have to deal with necessarily?
It actually goes to lots of different parts of, the internal auditing process, from your initial planning of the work program for the next 12 months or beyond, through to the engagement planning, and making a lot more decisions in those areas than that would have been used to doing. It also goes down through to shaping the internal audit team through professional development, through recruitment, through performance evaluations, I remember in the early days, it was the Chief Audit Executive who did all the performance appraisals. Well, that's actually been pushed down now, and a lot of that work is now being performed quite appropriately by team leaders.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So effectively, what we're trying to explore in this book is, what does it mean to step into the team leader role, and what are the things that you need to be across? The strategic alignment talks about environmental awareness and what they need to do in that space, the importance of relationship management and the role that team leaders play in that space these days as well. It's not just simply a matter of going out and doing an audit out at Broken Hill. It's having a much better appreciation for how the whole of the business is operating, maintaining relationships on a regular basis through all people within the organisation. And when you do go out to remote locations, what additional communication can you provide to them? Because people in these remote locations are often starved of good information. They feel a bit isolated. So it's a wonderful opportunity for team leaders to get out there and present things on topics that they're familiar with, which actually bring the people in those remote locations along in their own development as well. Mm-hmm. So it's fairly wide-reaching in terms of what it covers, and gets into even basics things around the scheduling of audit engagements and what can you do to innovate in terms of the practices you use and leveraging integrated auditing, and then getting down to delivering reports that are much more crisp than what they used to. They need to be short, sharp and succinct. So it actually covers a whole range of areas there, Jason.
Well, which is going to be great, because I think one of the things, at least I saw this with myself in public accounting, as well as in a lot of the audit shops that I was in. We usually do a very good job of teaching people how to audit, right? And so we become very good at kind of the technical aspect to our job. But often, we don't do as much with teaching people some of these soft skills, relationships, communication, some of these other stuff, excuse me, that they need to, be successful as a manager, as a team leader, right? We usually, kind of have promoted people based on, well, you've been here long enough, you really understand how to audit. And sometimes there's some of these gaps. And so I think this book is going to be a great, opportunity for people to kind of see some of those things and maybe help us, more proactively prepare people or realize some of these new things that are kind of placed on the team leaders, and be able to help them to get some of those skills before we just kind of throw them in the deep end of the pool and say, start swimming, sort of
well, thing. Absolutely. And it's very much about the influencing skills as well, which is part of those soft skills. How do you get people to do some of the things that they need to do, but aren't really motivated to get in and do?
Yeah. Well, and I've been preaching that now for a few years, because it's, to me, that is one of the biggest, and not just career skills, but life skills that we need to learn, because we're always having to do things to persuade or help kind of influence people. And there actually is kind of a scientific way on how this is actually done, what you need to do and how psychology actually works. And, a lot of people don't really go down that route. And we really do need to learn how to do that, so that we can, one of my friends, he's actually one of the top experts in the world on this topic. And he uses the term about persuading people that are in ways that are lasting and ethical, right? Which I think is beautiful, because it's about creating the relationship and communicating, and yes, using psychology, because, there's certain things like people are much more motivated on fear of loss than they are of fear of gain, right? But, if we can do it in the right way, we're effective at accomplishing our job, helping them do what they need to do, but we also are building that relationship and doing it in a way that everybody sees as ethical. So I'm glad that that's being brought up in the book, because, like you said, I think that is one of the things that, especially as auditors, because you think about any time that you have to deliver a report or do a meeting, and if we're asking people to, implement change, don't we have to kind of persuade them, along the whole way?
And I think, the audit report is a primary document out of any audit. And some people say that it's the most important, visible piece of the puzzle. But I think it's the hard yards is done well before any audit report comes out. It's in terms of the intellect you apply within the work you're doing, delivering against the audit objectives, and ultimately influencing people to do some things that they didn't recognise they needed to do. So that's the hard yards, and the report is the tool, I guess, that documents all of that and, allows people to refer back to the things they needed to do and how they're going to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, because if we just wait until the report, it's kind of too late at that point. There's a lot of things we have to do along the way. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
Very, very wise counsel. Well, hey, another thing that I wanted to just be able to kind of talk about with you is to maybe kind of explain a little bit or maybe share some insights. One of the podcasts that I listen to, one of his questions that he asks every guest, and so this is kind of my version of it, is something to the effect of, what would you tell your 21-year-old self today, right? So like if you were 21 again, or in this instance, like if you're starting off in an internal audit career or you're younger in your career, what are some of the things that you wish you had known, lessons that you've learned across your career and by being a CAE, that you think are important things that you'd want to share with others who are in this career and kind of moving up or trying to head towards that way for a long-term career?
So there are probably three key things I'll touch on, Jason, and we can expand on that if you like.
Yeah.
I think one of the most important starting points is professional development, and that is investing in the development of your staff. I'd much rather shave some dollars off my staffing budget and reinvest that through training and development than not do so, because we're relying on our auditors being credible, and they're the eyes and the ears of the Chief Audit Executive. So that's one part of it. And the other part of the professional development is your own commitment to maintaining skills that you need for your particular role. So professional development for me is a starting point. The other things that I'll touch on now are things that I wasn't aware of until I became a Chief Audit Executive. Mm-hmm. And when I did, I was holding a very senior position in internal audit, and I had never actually been to an audit committee meeting. So the first audit committee meeting I went to, I was the Chief Audit Executive. And I actually didn't know how they operate, which in some respects was a good thing, because I could go in and naively start changing things to the way that I thought they should operate, and that proved to be quite a good thing. But I hadn't actually attended an audit committee meeting until I was in that chief role. The second thing in this conversation that I wanted to draw out there was around the risk for Chief Audit Executives who go into an organisation with a transformation agenda. It's a really difficult thing at the best of times, but there's a lot of people within that organisation and even within the internal audit team who actually don't want the changes that you're there to implement. So what can happen is that there can be white-handing of the things you're trying to do. So you actually need to be acutely aware of that as a risk. And when things do start coming to the fore, you've got to be ready to address them fairly quickly.
Well, yeah, and that, actually, because when you say that, it just, a couple of different experiences that I had in my career just popped into my head, and that is, I've seen this not just from Chief Audit Executives, but other executives that I've worked with and coached over the years too, is there is, like you said, it is a real risk, when you go into a new position like that, I mean, obviously we're the new the new executive in town. We want to show everybody that we know what we're talking about, that we understand and we can create this transformation. But a lot of times, like you said, even in the best of times, it's a very difficult thing to do. And inevitably, a lot of times when people go in too aggressive and try to be too quick without really understanding the culture, they really end up getting themselves in trouble. I mean, I just to illustrate, like one story, when earlier in my career, right, when I was considering leaving public accounting, I remember interviewing with a chief audit executive who he was new in his role. And he was kind of explaining, like you said, this transformational agenda, kind of like what you're talking about. And I remember him saying some things like, "Oh, the IA doesn't know what they're talking about. And that's not what internal audit's going to be. I'm going to create the best, world-class internal audit thing, and I don't think they know what they're talking about." Effectively is kind of what he was saying. And I remember sitting in that interview going, "Oh my gosh, guy! First off, I'm not going to work for you anyway." But a year later, because I kind of followed what happened, that guy didn't have a job, right?
Yeah.
You end up sometimes really kind of cutting your legs off, by trying to be that way and not really understanding the culture, not using those influence techniques that we were talking about before that you so need at that point. So anyway, sorry, I just had flashbacks for a couple of things I had to share. So,
and I think it's important to share these things, Jason, because it's easy to go into these roles and think it's all nice and pleasant and so forth, but it can actually be very, very challenging, and it can be very emotionally draining. I mean, you might have the right technical skills, you might have the right soft skills to do the job, but it's the difficulty of dealing with really, really hard situations that often, the people haven't had to deal with at any time in their career.
Yeah, well, and it is. I mean,
I guess,
yeah.
I guess the key there is understanding that there's people within the organisation or within the profession that you can talk to, and make sure you do that. And if you can, get a good coach and a good mentor.
Well, and that is so important. I mean, that's, because I experienced that too, like you said, where your story of kind of showing up and it was your first audit committee meeting. I mean, it wasn't with the audit committee, but I had similar experiences like that, where all of a sudden I'm thrown into a situation. This is the first time I've ever had to deal with it. Right. And like you said, it is, a lot of times we think, oh, when I finally become chief audit executive, then everything is going to be easy. I'm going to be making all this money and everybody else is going to be doing the work. And it's like, if you think that, stop, right? It's a tough job. There's a reason why you get paid what you get paid and why it takes you so long to get there, because it is challenging. And you do have to reach out, have mentors, maybe join groups, peer groups, other things like that, to be able to try to get the support, because it's a hard job to do by yourself. And most of the time, the things you're going through, you've never experienced before. So you have no idea really how to respond, and you're hoping, that you're making the right choice. But it's so much nicer to be able to, refer to or talk back to somebody else and kind of bounce ideas off of them and make sure what you're doing, so you don't go in and do what we always used to call a career limiting move, right? You never want to do a CLM, career limiting move. And, the more help that you can get from mentors or others, the less likely you are to actually encounter one of those.
And that's very true. And I think, Chief Audit Executive and internal auditing is a very fulfilling career.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not sort of trying to paint gloom and doom.
No.
People need to be aware that there are some challenges, but once you've confronted those challenges and navigated them successfully, you get a lot of joy out of the work that you do.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's a very rewarding career. Like you said, obviously it's like with anything new, right? I mean, anytime you're learning something new, there's the change and stuff that you have to go through on that. So, all right. Well, I know we got a little sidetracked on that one, but you said there was kind of a third thing then too that you were in trying to think about this as well, that you'd want to make sure that people were aware of too?
And I think that's very much around the direction of the internal audit function. What is it that you want to achieve, and make sure that you have a shared vision with the Chief Executive and with the Audit Committee. And if that's world-class auditing, you need to understand what that actually means. What are the planks that you need to put in place? So once you've got a clear idea of your vision, it's then making sure that you develop a strategic roadmap that identify what you are going to do within internal audit over the next 12 months, 2 years, 3 years, to get to the position that the vision needs to take you to. And there are so many different elements involved in that, and the timing is really critical in terms of different elements. So if you're moving down the path of greater automation of your audit work, well, you need to actually invest in the training of your people, whether it's one of the software solutions for CATs like ACL, whether you're going to adopt artificial intelligence. What does that mean? When are you going to do it? What are you going to do it on? There's a whole range of things that you need to prepare on day one for what you're going to deliver in year 2 or year 3. So I think that's the next thing that's really important for me, Jason, is having the vision and having the strategic roadmap that's going to take you where the Audit Committee and the Chief Executive want you to be in a couple of years down the track.
Yeah, and I think that's actually, it's a really good point too for people that are interviewing for positions, right? Whether again it's for a CAE role or whether it's a role within an audit department, is for you to really kind of clearly understand what that vision is and what that role actually entails at that company. Because I think sometimes we kind of almost get the feeling, or at least I kind of get this from some people that I talk to, that, it's like we want to go in and be a world-class or, audit organization at every organization. It's like, well, that's not really how it works, right? I mean, internal audit looks a little bit different at every organization, in every industry. It's a little bit different. And so, you have to, like you said, kind of line up with the vision of what that is. And is this something that you actually want to do, right? Because if you want to be a part of a world-class audit function, then you need to make sure that you're working for an organization where the board and the executives also want there to be a world-class auditing organization. If not, you're going to be really frustrated, in that whole thing too. And I think sometimes we don't stop to realize or recognize that internal auditing looks different around the world and different within different organizations even.
It does. And the other element that's critical to the success is bringing your staff along, making sure that you've got their commitment and their capability to the vision, and that they're going to contribute to the journey so that you can actually set yourself up for success.
Well, and sometimes that's where, that I've seen both in my career and other people that I've worked with or talked with is, like that when you do change the vision or the direction, you have to bring people along, but some of those people may not come along in the journey, right? Because some of those people may not want what that future is. And, sometimes those are some of the hard decisions that you have to make as well. But yeah, and this kind of goes back again to your first thing on professional development, right? Is if we want to get to a certain point, it probably means either we need some new people to help in getting to that point. We need to develop the people that we do have. We've got to use the influence and other stuff to try to work both within our team and within the organization to be able to help us get there. So very, very wise counsel. It's like you've done this a few times.
Oh, I have indeed. And, towards the end, it's something to look back on with great joy, because you're actually leaving a legacy, not just within that organisation, but other people pick up on the good things that have been done and try to mirror those in their own organisations. So it's actually quite rewarding, Jason.
Well, it is. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because I know, it is a very rewarding profession in general. I mean, that's why I've loved kind of being in this space and why I'm here. But it's not just, the value that we can provide to the organizations, but it's also what we do for the other people, right? I mean, some of the people that I've worked with will be lifelong friends because of some of the stuff that we've gone through and their impact on me and perhaps my impact on them. And got to keep that bigger personal vision as well. And I mean, obviously you get it, Bruce. You keep giving back, even though you've been retired and kind of moved on, right? You're still giving to the profession, and trying to help others that are out there. So I know I, for one, am very, very grateful to have you in our profession. So
thank you, Jason. And Jane Fonda, I guess, described this as life's third act. Once you reach retirement, what are you going to be doing?
Oh yeah, no, actually.
And for me, it's really important to do those things that you're saying. You've got to have a clear path in retirement and have a clear retirement plan. And part of that should be to bring the next generation of business people along, including the internal audit guys.
Yep. Well, and that's exactly what you're doing. So yeah, kind of as a, again, a reminder for everybody listening, if you haven't already, go out, grab Bruce's book, New Auditor's Guide to Internal Auditing. Really a good resource, and be looking for this new team leaders book that he's working on right now. Should be out. I'm guessing probably sometime in 2020 would be the plan for it, right?
It should be out in the first quarter of 2020 if everything goes to plan.
All right, sweet. Look forward to actually seeing that. And yeah, again, Bruce, thanks for coming on with me today, and really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jason. All the best, mate.
All right. See ya.
Bye-bye.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for listening to today's episode of Jamming with Jason. Keep on rocking in the audit world. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll catch you later on the next show. If you'd like to earn continuing professional education for listening to today's episode, head on over to C-Risk Academy at ondemand.criskacademy.com. And that's C as in the letter C, riskacademy.com. Not only do you get a CPE certificate, but you also will have access to the video version of today's show. The views and opinions expressed on this show are that of the individuals and not of their respective organizations.